Richard Davenport believed the world was a stage, and he was its star. He saw his wife, Catherine, as a beautiful but bland part of the set dressing, reliable, unassuming, and utterly predictable. Tonight, he was stepping into the spotlight at the most exclusive party of the year, held on a billionaire's yacht. With a vibrant, adoring woman on his arm, he was ready to claim his destiny. He told Catherine he was on a business trip, a simple lie for a simple woman. He had no idea that the stage he was about to step onto wasn't his at all. He was merely a guest in a play he didn't know he was cast in, and the director, the producer, and the owner of the entire production was the one woman he had so foolishly underestimated. The scent of old money and new ambition clung to the air in Richard Davenport's sprawling suburban home. It was a scent he cultivated with the same meticulous care he applied to his Italian leather shoes and his carefully curated collection of Swiss watches. The house, a formidable structure of grey stone and cold glass overlooking a manicured lawn, was his testament to success. Or rather, he considered it his. In truth, it was Catherine's. A detail lost on Richard, who saw everything his wife possessed as a mere extension of himself. Catherine Vance, who had taken his name but not his nature, was an enigma he'd long stopped trying to solve. He'd married her for her quiet grace and what he perceived as a malleable, gentle spirit. She was the perfect backdrop for a man like him, beautiful in a classic, understated way that never threatened to outshine him, and seemingly content with a life dictated by charity luncheons and garden club meetings. He found her predictable, her routines as soothingly monotonous as the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. He loved her, he supposed, in the way one loves a comfortable, well-worn armchair. It was familiar, supportive, and you never had to think about it. "I'll be in Seattle until Sunday," Richard announced, striding into the kitchen. He loosened the silk tie at his neck, the picture of a man burdened by immense responsibility. "The Blackwood merger is at a critical stage. Harrison is flying the whole executive team out." Catherine was at the Marble Island, arranging a bouquet of white hydrangeas. She didn't look up, her focus entirely on the delicate placement of a stem. "Oh, that's sudden. I thought the meetings were in New York next week." Her voice was calm, a placid lake he could skim across without a second thought. He felt a familiar flicker of irritation at her lack of awe for his corporate world. "Things change, darling. The market waits for no one. It's a last-minute power move. We'll be on his private jet." He added the last detail for effect, expecting it to impress her. "I see," she said, finally turning. Her eyes, a deep, thoughtful grey, met his. There was no glimmer of suspicion, no hint of curiosity, just a placid acceptance that was both a relief and, in a strange way, an insult. Did she really care so little about his life? "Well, be sure to pack a warm coat. I hear the weather in Seattle is quite unpredictable this time of year." He almost laughed. Seattle. The lie had slipped off his tongue so easily. He wasn't going to Seattle. He was going to Newport Harbor, to the most anticipated social event of the season. A private party aboard the mega yacht, the Serenity, rumored to be owned by a reclusive tech magnate. The invitation had come through his boss, Harrison Blackwood, and it was the golden ticket Richard had been waiting for. This was his chance to rub shoulders with the true titans of industry, the kind of men who didn't just own companies but shaped economies. And he wouldn't be taking his quiet, sensible wife. He would be taking Tiffany. Tiffany Monroe was everything Catherine was not. She was a firework of vibrant colour and loud laughter. She was 26, with a cascade of blonde hair that wasn't entirely her own, and a relentless ambition that matched his. She looked at him with the wide-eyed adoration he felt he deserved, marveling at his stories of boardroom battles and corporate takeovers. She was a thrill, an accessory that screamed success far louder than his reserved wife ever could. Taking Catherine to a party like this would be like bringing a librarian to a rock concert. She wouldn't know how to perform. Tiffany, on the other hand, was born for the stage. "I'll have Mrs. Gable pack my things," he said, dismissing the conversation. He leaned in to kiss Catherine's cheek. Her skin was cool, and she smelled faintly of lavender and soap. It was the scent of home, of stability, and right now it felt like a cage. "Don't wait up for me tonight. I have to work late to prepare." "Of course, Richard," she replied, her voice smooth as silk. "Work hard, and do be careful." He walked away, already mentally rehearsing the persona he would adopt for the evening. The powerful, ascendant executive with a stunning beauty on his arm. He didn't see the look in Catherine's eyes as she watched him go. He didn't see the placid surface of the lake ripple, revealing a depth he couldn't possibly imagine. He didn't notice that her hand, the one not holding a flower stem, was resting on a sleek, encrypted tablet, its screen displaying the final manifest for a private event, a manifest that had his name on it, and next to it, a single damning annotation. Guest, unconfirmed. She carefully placed the last hydrangea into the vase, the picture of domestic tranquility. The illusion was perfect, and it was about to be shattered. The drive to Newport Harbor was a symphony of Richard's self-satisfaction. He sat behind the wheel of his Porsche, a car he'd bought himself as a bonus, feeling the thrum of the engine as a physical extension of his own power. Beside him, Tiffany Monroe was a dazzling spectacle. She wore a crimson dress that was less a piece of clothing and more a statement of intent, clinging to her curves in a way that left little to the imagination and everything to be desired. Diamonds, rented, though she didn't know that, sparkled at her throat and ears, catching the last rays of the setting sun. "I still can't believe we're going to this," she breathed, her voice a husky purr. She ran a perfectly manicured hand along the smooth leather of the dashboard. "A party on the Serenity. Everyone has been talking about it for months. They say the owner is richer than God and almost as invisible." "He's not invisible to the right people, Tiff," Richard said, a smug smile playing on his lips. He enjoyed educating her on the nuances of the world he was so close to conquering. "In our world, it's not about who you are, it's about who you know. Harrison Blackwood knows him, and I am Harrison's right-hand man. It's simple mathematics." "My brilliant man," she cooed, leaning over to kiss his cheek, leaving a faint smear of coral lipstick. "You're going to own this town one day." He believed it. Tonight felt like a coronation. He had the car, the woman, the invitation. He had meticulously constructed this version of himself, the version that deserved a seat at the table. He thought of Catherine, likely at home reading a book, or perhaps attending one of her tedious charity board meetings. He felt a pang, not of guilt, but of pity. Pity for her small, circumscribed life. She would never understand the thrill of the hunt, the electric buzz of ambition that fueled him. She was content in her gilded cage, while he was destined to rule the jungle. As they neared the marina, the scale of the wealth on display became breathtaking. A forest of masts pierced the twilight sky, belonging to vessels that were less boats and more floating mansions. But even among these giants, the Serenity stood apart. It was colossal, a sleek, multi-decked marvel of modern engineering, gleaming white under the marina lights, with lines so sharp and elegant it looked like it was slicing through the water even while docked. It was over 300 feet of pure, unadulterated power, with a helicopter sitting nonchalantly on its upper deck. A quiet army of crew members in crisp white uniforms moved about with silent efficiency. For the first time that evening, a sliver of doubt pierced Richard's bravado. This was a level of wealth that made his Porsche feel like a child's toy. This wasn't just success. It was dominance. He quickly suppressed the feeling, replacing it with a surge of possessive desire. This was the world he belonged in. He would not be intimidated. "Oh my God, Richard," Tiffany whispered, her voice filled with genuine awe. It's a palace. And we, my dear, have an invitation to the throne room," he said, his confidence returning. He valet-parked the car and took her arm, striding towards the gangplank as if he owned the place. He gave his name to a stern-looking man with an earpiece, who checked it against a tablet and nodded curtly. "Mr. Davenport, welcome aboard." As they stepped onto the polished teak deck, the sound of a string quartet and muted, sophisticated chatter washed over them. Waitstaff glided through the crowd with trays of champagne and impossibly intricate hors d'oeuvres. The guests were a collection of faces he recognized from the covers of business magazines and society pages: CEOs, senators, old money scions, and tech billionaires. He saw Harrison Blackwood across the deck, holding court with a group of investors, and felt a jolt of pride. He had arrived. Tiffany clung to his arm, her eyes wide. "This is insane. Look, isn't that Governor Peterson? And Beatrice Langley, the columnist?" "Try to act like you've been here before," Richard muttered, though he was just as star-struck. He grabbed 2 glasses of champagne, handing one to her. "Mingle, but don't wander off. Stick with me. We need to project an image of a power couple." He was so engrossed in his performance, in curating every glance and handshake, that he failed to notice the subtle currents moving beneath the glittering surface of the party. He didn't see the way certain guests would glance at him, then at Tiffany, before sharing a whispered comment with their companion. He didn't register the oddly knowing smiles from the crew. He was an actor on a stage, blinded by the footlights, completely unaware that the audience already knew the plot, knew the twist, and were just waiting for the final, devastating act to begin. He scanned the crowd, looking for the mysterious host, the invisible king of this floating castle, eager to pay his respects and make his mark. He had no idea he was about to meet the owner very, very soon. The air on the upper deck of the Serenity was thick with the scent of salt water and expensive perfume. Richard, with Tiffany fixed to his side like a designer accessory, navigated the crowd with a predatory grace. His objective was clear: find Harrison Blackwood, secure a brief but impactful introduction to their host, and solidify his position as an indispensable player in Blackwood's orbit. He spotted Blackwood near the stern, locked in an animated conversation with a senator and a hedge fund manager. Richard began to steer Tiffany in that direction, but their path was intercepted by a man who seemed to materialize out of the throng. The man was tall and impeccably dressed in a bespoke navy suit that probably cost more than Richard's monthly mortgage. He had dark, intelligent eyes, a warm but inscrutable smile, and an air of relaxed authority that made him the immediate center of gravity. Richard didn't recognize him. He was too young to be the reclusive owner, he reasoned. He must be a son, or perhaps the chief of staff, the gatekeeper. "Richard Davenport," the man said, extending a hand. His voice was smooth and carried an easy confidence. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. I'm Leo Maxwell." Richard shook his hand, surprised that this man knew his name. He must be more important than he looked. "The pleasure is all mine, Mr. Maxwell. This is an incredible vessel. My compliments to the host." He gestured vaguely, as if the host were a deity floating in the ether. Leo's smile widened slightly, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "We're very proud of her. And please, call me Leo." He then turned his attention to Tiffany, his gaze polite but brief, a quick professional assessment that catalogued her dress, her jewellery, and her eager expression in a single sweep. "And you must be his guest." The phrasing was odd. Not your lovely wife or your partner, just his guest. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible slight, but it pricked at Richard's ego. Tiffany, however, was oblivious. She beamed, offering her hand. "Tiffany Monroe, it is an absolute honor to be here. Your yacht is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "We're glad you like it, Miss Monroe," Leo replied, his tone perfectly courteous. His focus, however, immediately returned to Richard. "We've been expecting you, Mr. Davenport. In fact, your presence tonight is particularly significant." Richard's chest swelled with pride. Significant. He knew it. Blackwood must have been singing his praises to the host. The merger, his brilliant strategies, it was all paying off. "Well, I'm honored to be considered so. Harrison Blackwood has been a great mentor, and the work we're doing together is poised to reshape the industry." Leo nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Yes, Harrison Blackwood. He's here, of course, enjoying our hospitality." There was a peculiar emphasis on the word "our," but Richard was too busy basking in his own perceived importance to notice. "Before you get swept away, I must tell you that the owner of the Serenity makes it a point to personally greet every guest. She will be making her official welcome shortly. I do hope you'll stay for it." The host was a woman. Richard's internal calculations shifted. He had pictured a Howard Hughes-type figure, a grizzled old man hidden away from the world. A woman. That was unexpected. Probably some heiress who had inherited her father's or husband's fortune. It made the conquest less impressive, but perhaps she would be more susceptible to his charm. "A woman?" Tiffany whispered to him, as Leo excused himself and melted back into the crowd. "How fabulous. Maybe she's single. You think she's old?" "Doesn't matter," Richard murmured, his eyes scanning the crowd with renewed interest. "This changes the angle of approach, but not the goal." He felt a renewed sense of purpose. He would charm this mysterious matriarch, this queen of tech. He could do that. He was good with women. He looked at Tiffany, then thought of Catherine. He knew how to manage their expectations, how to play on their emotions. This would be easy. He decided to make his way to the bar to get a refill, feeling a new swagger in his step. As he waited, he overheard two women talking nearby. One was Beatrice Langley, the influential society columnist, whose words could make or break a reputation overnight. "Built it all from the ground up, you know," Beatrice was saying, her voice a low, conspiratorial hum. "Not inherited. They say she started in a garage, just 2 servers and an idea that everyone said was impossible. Wrote the original code herself. Incredible," her companion replied, "and to stay so private for so long, especially in this day and age. It's a masterclass in power. No one even knew what she looked like until about a year ago." Richard's ears perked up. A self-made woman. That was a different beast entirely, more formidable, more interesting. He felt a jolt of genuine excitement. This was a true peer. He felt a sudden, sharp disdain for the heiresses and socialites dotting the party. This woman, this owner, was like him. A builder, a visionary. He turned from the bar, champagne flute in hand, and saw Leo Maxwell again. This time he was standing with Harrison Blackwood, and the dynamic was all wrong. It wasn't Leo reporting to Harrison. It was Harrison, Richard's powerful, intimidating boss, who was listening with a rapt, almost deferential expression. Leo was speaking, and Harrison was nodding, his body language that of a subordinate. A cold knot of confusion began to form in Richard's stomach. Who the hell was Leo Maxwell? And why did his boss look like he was being called into the principal's office? The perfectly constructed reality he had built for this evening was beginning to crack at the foundations, and for the first time he felt a chilling premonition that he was not the star of this show, but a fool who had wandered onto the wrong set. The string quartet transitioned from Vivaldi to something more modern and melancholic, a subtle shift in the party's atmosphere that mirrored the growing unease in Richard's gut. He tried to dismiss the strange interaction between his boss and Leo Maxwell. Perhaps Maxwell was a key investor, a silent partner of immense influence. Yes, that had to be it. It was the only explanation that kept Richard's worldview intact. He finally caught Harrison Blackwood's eye across the deck. He gave a confident nod, raising his glass in a silent toast. Blackwood's response was not the warm, conspiratorial smile he expected. Instead, his boss's face tightened, his eyes flicking from Richard to the crimson-clad Tiffany and back again. The look he gave Richard was one of profound disappointment, laced with something else: pity. Before Richard could process this, Blackwood disengaged from his conversation and walked towards him. His stride was heavy, purposeful. "Davenport," he said, his voice low and tight, devoid of its usual bonhomie. "Harrison, what a night, an incredible gathering," Richard said, trying to project an air of effortless belonging. "I was just about to come find you. This is Tiffany Monroe." Tiffany offered a dazzling smile. "Mr. Blackwood, it's such an honor." Blackwood gave her a glance so fleeting it was barely a recognition. His cold, furious eyes were locked on Richard. "What in God's name are you doing, Richard?" The question hit Richard like a physical blow. "I'm sorry?" "Bringing her," Blackwood hissed, his voice a venomous whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "To this event, of all the arrogant, idiotic, self-destructive things you have ever done, this takes the prize." Richard was completely bewildered. His carefully constructed reality was crumbling around him. "Harrison, I don't understand. She's my date. It's a party." Blackwood let out a short, incredulous laugh that was utterly devoid of humor. "A party? You think this is just a party? You fool! You think the invitation I extended was for you to bring your flavor of the month to show off?" "I invited you because I was trying to help you, to give you one last chance to salvage your career and perhaps your life. I assumed you would have the basic decency and intelligence to bring your wife." "My wife?" Richard stammered, the name sounding foreign in this context. "Catherine. Why would I bring Catherine? She has no interest in these things. She wouldn't fit in." The look of contempt on Blackwood's face deepened. "She wouldn't fit in," he repeated, as if tasting the words and finding them repulsive. "You have been married to that woman for 10 years, and you know so little about her that it is, without a doubt, the single greatest failure of your life. You see a quiet homemaker. The rest of the world that matters, sees one of the most brilliant and powerful minds of our generation." Richard's head was spinning. He felt a wave of dizziness, the champagne turning sour in his stomach. This was a nightmare, a bizarre, incomprehensible joke. "What are you talking about?" "Catherine. She runs a small charitable foundation for children's literacy. She organizes book drives." Blackwood stared at him for a long moment, and Richard saw a final flicker of pity in his eyes before it was extinguished by pure, cold fury. "You're finished, Davenport, not just at my firm. I think you're about to be finished everywhere." He turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Richard standing there, his face pale, his mind reeling. Tiffany, who had witnessed the entire exchange, looked horrified. "Richard, what was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. What did he mean about your wife? Richard couldn't answer. His gaze drifted across the deck, which now felt less like a party and more like an arena. He saw the whispers, the sideways glances, and understood them for the first time. They weren't looks of admiration. They were looks of morbid curiosity. They were all watching him, waiting for the axe to fall. His eyes found Leo Maxwell again. He was standing near a small, raised platform at the bow of the yacht, a microphone in his hand. The music faded, and a hush fell over the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Leo's smooth, amplified voice echoed across the deck, "if I could have your attention for a moment." Every face turned towards him. Richard felt a sense of dread so profound it was almost paralyzing. Tiffany gripped his arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. "For years, she has preferred to work behind the scenes," Leo continued, his voice resonating with genuine admiration. "She believes that the work should speak for itself, that innovation is more important than fame, and that integrity is more valuable than publicity. She built an empire not on a family name or an inheritance, but on a foundation of pure, unadulterated genius and relentless hard work." Richard felt his blood run cold. He knew, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, what was about to happen. It was impossible, insane, but he knew. "Tonight, we are not just celebrating the launch of the Aura satellite network, a project that will redefine global communications," Leo said, his smile widening. "We are celebrating the visionary who made it all possible. It is my deepest honor and my greatest privilege to introduce to you all my partner, my friend, and the founder and CEO of Vance Innovations, the owner of this yacht, the Serenity." Leo turned and gestured towards the grand staircase, leading down from the upper deck. A profound silence fell over the assembled guests. Richard's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He followed everyone's gaze. And then she appeared. She descended the staircase, not like the woman who arranged flowers in his kitchen, but like a queen descending to her court. The transformation was so absolute, so staggering, that for a moment Richard's mind refused to process it. This was not the Catherine he knew. The quiet, almost plain woman who favored simple cardigans and sensible shoes was gone. In her place was a figure of breathtaking power and elegance. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that shimmered under the yacht's lights, cut in a severe, minimalist style that was more commanding than any frill or sequin could ever be. Her hair, usually tied back in a simple knot, was styled in a sleek, sophisticated chignon that exposed the graceful line of her neck. A single, magnificent diamond necklace rested against her collarbone, not a gaudy bauble, but a piece of art that bespoke a fortune so vast it had no need to shout. But it wasn't the dress or the diamonds that struck Richard dumb. It was her face. The gentle, unassuming features were the same, but they were animated by a confidence and an intelligence he had never seen before. Her grey eyes, which he had always thought of as placid, now held a sharp, analytical fire. There was a small, knowing smile on her lips, a smile that was not warm or inviting, but coolly triumphant. This was not his wife. This was a stranger, a titan, a force of nature. The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of genuine respect and admiration. Richard stood frozen, the champagne glass slipping from his nerveless fingers and shattering on the teak deck. Tiffany let out a small, strangled gasp beside him, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. Catherine reached the bottom of the stairs, where Leo Maxwell greeted her with a warm, deferential kiss on the cheek. She then moved to the microphone, her movements fluid and assured. The applause slowly died down as she prepared to speak. Her eyes swept across the assembled guests, the powerful and the influential, all of them looking up at her. Then her gaze found Richard. She looked directly at him, her expression unchanging, her eyes holding his for a long, silent moment across the crowded deck. In that single look, he saw everything: the years of his condescension, his dismissiveness, his casual cruelty, all of it seen, noted, and filed away. He saw the quiet patience of a woman playing a game so long and so complex that he never even knew he was a piece on the board. "Thank you, Leo," she began, her voice calm and clear, amplified for all to hear. It was the same voice that asked him if he wanted coffee in the morning, but now it held an authority that commanded the attention of billionaires and senators. "And thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate this milestone with Vance Innovations." Vance Innovations, her maiden name, the name of the small, insignificant charity she ran. It had been a front. All of it. The tedious board meetings, the book drives, the quiet afternoons spent in her office at home. She hadn't been organizing bake sales. She had been building a global tech empire. For a long time, she continued, her gaze finally leaving Richard to address the crowd, I believed that the best way to do good work was to do it quietly. I wanted my creations, not my name, to be known. I wanted to build a company based on merit, not personality. But I've come to realize that in the world we live in, silence can sometimes be mistaken for absence. And absence? She paused, her eyes finding Richard again, a flicker of something cold and sharp in their depths, can be mistaken for weakness. A murmur went through the crowd. Everyone understood the subtext. They all looked from the powerful woman at the podium to the pale, shattered man standing next to his garishly dressed mistress. The drama was unfolding exactly as she had planned. This wasn't just a product launch. It was a public execution. "So tonight we step into the light," Catherine declared, a new strength in her voice. "Vance Innovations is no longer a silent partner in progress. We are a leading force. The Aura Network is just the beginning." She went on to speak about technology, about the future, about ethical innovation. Her speech was brilliant, insightful, and visionary. Richard heard none of it. The words were just noise, the buzzing of flies in a tomb. His tomb. He looked at Tiffany. Her face was ashen. The adoration in her eyes had been replaced by a dawning, sickening realization. She wasn't the guest of an up-and-coming executive. She was the unwitting accomplice in the public humiliation of a fool who had betrayed one of the most powerful women in the world. Her dreams of marrying into wealth and power dissolved into a nightmare. She was on the wrong side of history, a footnote in a story of epic karmic retribution. When Catherine finished her speech, the applause was thunderous. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile this time, as she was surrounded by a throng of well-wishers, a circle of power that Richard could never hope to penetrate. Harrison Blackwood was among the first to congratulate her, his face a picture of fawning respect. The party continued, but the energy had shifted. The central spectacle was over. Richard was no longer a guest. He was a ghost, an embarrassment that people politely ignored. He and Tiffany stood alone in a bubble of silent humiliation, the shattered glass at his feet, a perfect metaphor for his life. The illusion of his control, his success, his very identity, had been irrevocably smashed, and the woman holding the hammer was his wife. The world had narrowed to the space between Richard and Catherine. The chatter of the party, the music, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. She had finished receiving her accolades and was now walking towards him. Her path was clear. People parted before her, as if by an invisible force. Leo Maxwell was a step behind her, his expression grim and protective. Richard's mind was a maelstrom of denial and rage. This was a trick, a lie, a grotesque, elaborate prank. But the cold certainty in Catherine's eyes told him it was all real. She stopped a few feet from him. She didn't look at Tiffany, dismissing her so completely that it was more insulting than any venomous glare. Her entire focus was on Richard. "Hello, Richard," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying the immense weight of their shared history and his profound betrayal. "Surprised to see me? I thought you were in Seattle." He could only stare, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish gasping for air. Words failed him. What could he say? Every lie, every condescending remark, every moment he had underestimated her, played back in his mind in a humiliating, high-speed montage. This is," he finally stammered. "How?" A faint, pitying smile touched her lips. "How? While you were practicing your golf swing, I was practicing coding. While you were at your long lunches, I was in negotiations with venture capitalists. While you were complaining about my charity work, that charity, Vance Innovations, was acquiring patents and securing government contracts. I built this, Richard, all of it. And I did it by being consistently, thoroughly underestimated, especially by you." Each word was a precisely placed scalpel, dissecting his ego, laying bare the pathetic man beneath the expensive suit. "The house," he whispered, the realization dawning. "The cars. My bonuses. The house was purchased by my company as an executive residence. You live there at my discretion," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. It was a simple statement of fact. "The Porsche you're so proud of." "It was a signing bonus for a deal I closed with a German tech firm. Your bonuses from Harrison's company were often facilitated by my silent investments in his firm, a gesture of goodwill I now deeply regret. I wanted my husband to feel successful. I propped you up, Richard. I built a pedestal for you, hoping you would eventually grow tall enough to deserve it. Instead, you just used the extra height to look down on me." Tiffany began to sob quietly, a desperate, hiccuping sound. "I didn't know," she whimpered, looking at Catherine. "I swear I had no idea." Catherine finally turned her gaze to Tiffany, and the coldness in her eyes was glacial. "You knew he was a married man. That's all you needed to know. You made your choice. Now you get to live with the consequences, just like him." She turned back to Richard. "I believe your things are already being packed. They will be delivered to your parents' address in Ohio tomorrow. The locks have been changed. The joint accounts have been frozen. Or rather, the allowance account I funded for you has been closed. My lawyers will be in touch with you tomorrow morning regarding the divorce proceedings. The prenuptial agreement you were so eager for me to sign is quite clear. You leave with what you brought into this marriage, which, if I recall, was a used sedan and student loan debt." Richard's face, which had been pale with shock, now flushed with impotent fury. "You can't do this! I am your husband." "No," Catherine said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, but it cut through the air with chilling finality. "You were a liability I could no longer afford. You became arrogant and sloppy. This little stunt tonight, bringing her here. It wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage, Richard. It was a business risk. You risked embarrassing me in front of my partners and investors." Her eyes flicked towards Harrison Blackwood, who was watching from a safe distance. "Speaking of which, Mr. Blackwood," Harrison approached, his face a mixture of fear and contrition. "Catherine, my deepest apologies for this situation." "It's Miss Vance," she corrected him coldly. and my apology is not what you should be concerned with. The merger you proposed between your company and mine is, of course, off the table, permanently. I cannot, in good conscience, do business with a man who employs individuals with such a staggering lack of judgment and character. I would suggest you clean house, Harrison, starting immediately. Blackwood's face went white. He understood the command perfectly. He looked at Richard with pure hatred. Davenport, you're fired. Security will escort you out of the building on Monday morning. It was the final blow. In the space of 10 minutes, Richard had lost his wife, his home, his fortune, his career, and his reputation. He was nothing. Less than nothing. He was a cautionary tale, a laughing stock. "It's time for you to leave my party," Catherine said, her voice back to its calm, dispassionate tone. She gave a slight nod to her left. Two large men in discreet dark suits, part of the yacht's security detail, materialized at Richard's side. "Miss Vance," one of them said, "please escort Mr. Davenport and his guest off my yacht," she instructed. "See that they get a taxi. I believe Mr. Davenport's car is no longer his to drive." Richard's body went rigid. Humiliation washed over him in a sickening wave. He looked around at the faces of the guests, who were now openly staring, their expressions ranging from pity to schadenfreude. This was a public crucifixion, and he was the main event. One of the security men gently but firmly took his arm. The touch was the final indignity. He was being physically removed, ejected from the world he had fought so desperately to join. He allowed himself to be led away, a weeping Tiffany stumbling behind him. As he was marched down the gangplank, back to the world of ordinary men, he looked back one last time. Catherine was standing on the deck, a glass of champagne in her hand, the lights of her magnificent yacht framing her like a halo. She was talking to Leo, a small, genuine smile on her face. She didn't watch him go. She had already forgotten him. He was a problem that had been solved, a loose end that had been tied. Her empire was secure, her future was bright, and he was no longer a part of it. The months that followed were a study in descent for Richard Davenport. The name that had once opened doors now closed them firmly in his face. The story of Catherine Vance's spectacular unveiling and his own public defenestration became the stuff of legend in business circles. A brutal, brilliant masterstroke of revenge and power. No one wanted to hire the man who had been so comprehensively outplayed, the fool who slept next to an empress and thought she was a chambermaid. He was forced to retreat to his parents' home in Ohio, a shrunken, bitter man living in his childhood bedroom. The tailored suits were replaced by worn-out jeans, the Porsche by his father's decade-old pickup truck. The calls from Tiffany stopped after a week. She had her own social fires to put out, her own reputation to salvage. She had bet on a horse that not only lost the race, but collapsed dead at the starting gate. He saw Catherine, of course. It was impossible not to. Her face was on the cover of Forbes, of Wired, of Time magazine. "The Woman Who Built Tomorrow," one headline read. "The Quiet Titan of Tech," read another. He watched her interviews, his stomach churning with a toxic cocktail of envy, hatred, and a strange, agonizing flicker of what might have been pride. He saw her speaking at global economic forums, advising presidents, and launching philanthropic initiatives that dwarfed her old, fabricated charity work. She was changing the world, just as she'd said she would. The divorce was swift and clinical. Catherine's lawyers were mercilessly efficient. The prenup held firm, a steel trap he had foolishly walked right into, blinded by his own arrogance at the time, thinking he was the one with the future assets to protect. He was left with nothing but the crushing weight of his own monumental stupidity. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Catherine Vance stood on the deck of the Serenity, as it cut through the turquoise waters of the Aegean Sea. The sun was warm on her face, and the wind whipped stray strands of hair from her elegant ponytail. She wore simple white linen trousers and a blue cashmere sweater, a picture of relaxed, unburdened power. Leo Maxwell came to stand beside her, handing her a cup of tea. "The final papers came through this morning," he said quietly. "It's officially done." Catherine nodded, taking a sip. She stared out at the endless horizon where the sea met the sky. "Good. How do you feel?" Leo asked, his voice gentle. He was one of the few people who knew the whole story, who had been with her since the early days in the garage, coding until their fingers were numb. He had seen the quiet pain she had hidden for years behind a placid smile. She was silent for a long moment, considering the question. She didn't feel the triumphant glee or the fiery rage that a lesser person might have felt. She didn't feel hatred for Richard anymore. What she felt was a profound sense of release. "I feel like I've been wearing a coat that was 2 sizes too small for a decade," she said finally. "I kept trying to shrink myself to fit into it, telling myself it was a sensible, practical coat. But it was suffocating me. Now, I've finally taken it off, and I can breathe." She thought of Richard, not the broken man he had become, but the charming, ambitious young man she had first fallen in love with. She had wanted, so desperately, for him to be her partner, her equal. She had hidden her work, her intellect, her wealth, because she was afraid it would emasculate him. She had wanted him to love her, Catherine, not the CEO of Vance Innovations. But in her effort to protect his ego, she had allowed him to build a cage for them both. His was a cage of arrogance and illusion. Hers was a cage of secrets and self-diminishment. The party hadn't been an act of revenge. Not really. It had been a declaration of independence. It was the only way to shatter both cages at once, in a way so spectacular and final that there could be no going back. "Blackwood's company filed for Chapter 11 last week," Leo mentioned. "Without your merger, they were hollowed out." Catherine nodded again, a flicker of regret in her eyes. "A shame. There were good people there. But leadership starts at the top. He made his choice to enable Richard's behavior." She turned to Leo, a real smile gracing her lips, one that reached her clear, grey eyes. "Enough about the past. Let's talk about the future. Show me the latest schematics for the Mars project." Leo grinned. "I thought you'd never ask." He opened a tablet, and together they looked at blueprints for a new world, their heads close together, partners in every sense of the word. The yacht, once a stage for a domestic drama, was now what it was always meant to be. A base of operations, a floating think tank, a vessel carrying its captain not away from a failed past, but towards a limitless future. Catherine Vance looked out at the horizon, no longer just a wife, no longer a secret. She was the captain of her ship, the master of her destiny, sailing towards a dawn of her own creation. 2 years had passed. For Catherine Vance, they were years of exponential growth and profound purpose. For Richard Davenport, they were a slow, grinding erosion of self. The fury had long since cooled, leaving behind the cold, heavy sediment of resentment. He was back in Ohio, a ghost haunting the familiar streets of his youth, his fall from grace a cautionary tale whispered at the local country club he could no longer afford. He worked now. Not in a gleaming corporate tower, but behind the wheel of a refrigerated van for an upscale catering company. It was a humbling, anonymous existence. He delivered delicate canapés and crates of champagne to the very sort of parties he once attended, his presence now relegated to the service entrance. He told himself it was temporary, a blip, But the days bled into weeks, the weeks into months, and the months into the stark reality of his new life. One crisp autumn evening, he was assigned to a major gala at the city's newly built Science Museum. It was a high-profile event. The client had booked their most exclusive package. As Richard wheeled racks of artfully arranged food into the cavernous, star-lit atrium, he saw the banners. They were emblazoned with a sleek, familiar logo, a stylized V. It was the annual fundraising gala for the Vance Foundation for Women in STEM. His blood ran cold. For a moment, he considered walking out, feigning illness, driving the van into a ditch, anything to escape. But he was trapped. He needed the money. Swallowing the bitter taste of irony, he put on his black uniform jacket and melted into the background, just another face in the army of servers. From the shadows of the service corridors, he watched the world that had once been his. He saw faces he recognized, local politicians, business leaders, the kind of people who would have once shaken his hand and sought his opinion. None of them gave him a second glance. In his generic uniform, he was invisible, a functional part of the scenery. Then he saw her. Catherine was not an attendee. She was the gravitational center of the event. She moved through the room with an effortless grace, not the manufactured poise he had cultivated, but a deep, unshakable confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was. She was laughing with a group of young women, their faces bright with awe. They were the inaugural class of Vance scholars, the brilliant minds she was personally funding. Later, she took the stage. The room fell silent. Richard stood frozen by a pillar, his tray of empty wine glasses forgotten in his hand. She spoke of the future, of breaking barriers, of the responsibility that came with power. There was no bitterness in her voice, no hint of the personal war she had won. She had transcended it. Her battle was no longer with a single, faithless man. It was for the future of an entire generation of women. After her speech, as the applause washed over the hall, she made her way through the crowd. Her path took her directly towards Richard's station. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. His throat went dry. She was 10 feet away, 5. He could smell the faint, clean scent of her perfume. This was it, the moment of confrontation, of recognition. He braced himself for the flicker of shock, the flash of contempt, the icy dismissal. He held his breath. Catherine's eyes, clear and focused, swept past him. Her gaze lingered for a fraction of a second on the pillar he stood beside before moving on, scanning the crowd for the next person she needed to greet. She looked through him. Not with malice, not with intention, but with the simple, devastating reality of his own insignificance. He was a server, a pillar, a part of the room's architecture. He did not register. He did not exist. She turned away, smiling warmly at a young scholar who had approached her. The moment was over. Richard stood perfectly still, the weight of the tray in his hand suddenly unbearable. It wasn't the public humiliation on the yacht that had been his true punishment. It was this utter erasure. Her revenge was not a single, fiery act, but a slow, quiet extinction. Her world had grown so vast, so bright, so full of consequence, while his had shrunk to the size of this service corridor. He was a ghost at the feast of the life he had thrown away, and the one person he haunted could no longer even see him. He picked up another empty glass, his movements mechanical, his spirit finally, irrevocably, broken. The story of Richard and Catherine is a powerful, modern-day fable about perception versus reality. It's a chilling reminder that the people we think we know best are often the ones who hold the deepest secrets, and that underestimating someone based on the quiet role they play in your life can lead to your own spectacular downfall. True power isn't loud. It doesn't need constant validation. It works silently, patiently, building an empire while others are busy building an ego. Richard saw a simple wife. The world was about to see a queen. If this story of karmic justice and triumphant self-realization resonated with you, let us know in the comments below. What was the moment you knew Richard's world was about to end? Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed the ride, and be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We have so many more stories of intrigue, betrayal, and ultimate triumph coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thank you for listening.